I'd been coming to the same cafe for months, always the same corner by the window, my laptop open but mostly ignored, a half-empty thermos of coffee sitting next to me like a placeholder. The barista knew me by sight, sometimes by name, sometimes just by the habitual nod I gave while staring out at the street. Today she wasn't behind the counter, instead she was there. My mom's best friend, though I didn't think of her that way until moments like this. I recognized the soft fall of her hair, streaked with silver at the temples, the way she tucked it behind her ear when she concentrated. She ordered a black coffee and, without looking, gave the exact change I thought I remembered from some past visit. The same order she'd had 3 weeks ago. I froze for a second, not sure if it was the memory or the way her hand lingered on the counter, brushing against mine. My eyes flicked to her hands again, long, deliberate fingers, a subtle tremor as she adjusted the sleeve of her cardigan. I looked down at my cup, pretending to stir the coffee, but the spoon barely moved. "Hey," she said finally, turning toward me, and it was just hey, but it landed heavier than it should have. There was a pause, a flicker in her expression, hesitation, amusement. I wasn't sure, and neither were we. "Hey," I replied too quickly. My voice sounded different in my own ears. I cleared my throat, watching her smile, that small, controlled smile she always had, like she was careful not to reveal anything too fast. We sat near each other, not next to, not across, some unspoken middle distance. I noticed the way her eyes skimmed the menu again, even though she had already ordered, the curl of her lips at some private thought. I wanted to ask her what she was thinking, but I didn't. Instead, I folded my napkin with exaggerated care, just to move my hands. She tilted her head, watching me, and I caught her flicker of interest, or maybe it was just my imagination. The conversation was slow, jagged, awkward. We stumbled over names of books, of music, of movies. I laughed too soon at one of her jokes, and she paused like she'd been expecting something quieter, more measured. I noticed the way her foot under the table, barely touching mine. I didn't move. Halfway through, I realized I had left 3 unsent texts open on my phone, a habit I had when I was nervous or bored or lonely. I glanced down, thumb hovering over the messages, then back up. She caught me, briefly, and her eyebrows raised. No judgment, just that slight, curious look that makes you want to explain yourself, but maybe shouldn't. At one point, she said, almost to herself, "This isn't fair to you." I swallowed. I wanted to say something normal, polite. Instead, I found myself whispering, "It's exactly what I want." She looked at me then, properly, the way she never did when my mom was around. There was a pause, long enough for the cafe hum to settle into the quiet corners between us, and I realized my coffee had gone cold. I didn't care. She stood to leave slowly, letting her bag slide from her shoulder with a gentle thump. I followed her eyes as she moved, and then she paused at the door, turned back, smiled faintly. "I'll see you," she said, but it sounded like a question. I nodded, and for a moment, I thought I might say something else, something that mattered. But I stayed quiet, listening to the soft scrape of her shoes on the floor as she left. Then my phone buzzed, a message from her. I didn't look immediately. My thumb hovered over the screen, hesitant, aware that one swipe could change the rest of the day. Maybe the rest of everything. Not yet. The next Saturday, I found her in the small corner bookstore we both liked. She was crouched between shelves, flipping a worn paperback as if she'd found it by accident. "Hey," I said, sliding into the aisle beside her. My voice sounded normal, but inside it felt like every heartbeat was louder than it should be. She glanced up, a brief flicker of surprise in her eyes, then smiled. "You read much?" "Some," I said, and the words stumbled out. I wanted to say more. Wanted to tell her I'd memorized the back cover of half these books just to imagine her here. I didn't. We walked slowly through the aisles. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume, the way her fingers brushed the spines of books, lingering almost like she was making up her mind about more than just what to buy. "I used to come here with my son," she said quietly, her voice soft against the hum of the overhead lights. "He's older now." She trailed off, like she didn't want to say more, or maybe didn't know what to say. I nodded, even though it made me uneasy. The reminder of why this was complicated. She was my mom's best friend. She was divorced, careful in ways I wasn't sure I fully understood yet, And still, there was that pull. We reached the register together, and I watched her hands again, the way they hovered over her wallet before paying. I wanted to reach out, to brush my thumb along hers, but I didn't. Instead, I picked up a small volume of poetry she had glanced at and placed it beside my coffee-stained notebook on the counter. She looked down at it. A tiny smile tugged at her lips. "You remembered," she said, almost to herself. "I remembered," I admitted, my voice quieter than I intended. And I did. I remembered everything she had ever mentioned, everything she hadn't. Outside, we walked slowly down the street, the late autumn wind tugging at our coats. Silence settled comfortably between us, but it was heavy with things unsaid. I imagined all the ways this could go wrong: a neighbor seeing us, my mom calling, some absurdly awkward conversation we could never recover from. Yet I didn't move away. Instead, I offered her my hand to steady her over a wet patch on the sidewalk. Her fingers brushed mine, just for a second, but enough to make my stomach tighten. She didn't pull back, didn't linger either. Just that moment, suspended, and then she walked a few steps ahead, glancing back with that same faint, knowing smile. Later at my apartment, I found myself replaying it. The brush of her fingers, the tilt of her head when she smiled, the quiet confessions that hung between us like fragile glass. I didn't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. Not my mom, not friends, not anyone who cared just enough to notice my routine, but her. And I hated that it was so simple yet so impossible. It was after work, a dull Thursday, the cafe had emptied, the hum of the fridge and the drip of the coffee machine filling the silence. She was wiping down tables, sleeves rolled up, hair loose around her shoulders. I leaned against the counter, pretending to scroll on my phone, though I wasn't looking at anything. "You're here a lot," she said finally, not looking up. Her voice was soft, almost accusatory. I like the place," I said, fumbling for casual. My thumb brushed the edge of the counter nervously. She glanced at me then, just for a second, like she was measuring something I couldn't see. She laughed, quiet and dry. "It's not just the coffee, is it?" I didn't answer. I wanted to. I wanted to say yes. But then my throat caught. Instead, I folded my hands over my notebook, resting them there like I belonged. "You're younger than me," she said finally, low enough that I had to lean closer to hear. She didn't say it like a question, more like a warning. Her eyes flicked to the door, then back to me, sharp and hesitant all at once. "I know," I whispered. I don't care." Her hand froze mid-wipe, a rag clutched loosely, her eyes wide for a fraction of a second, searched mine. Then she shook her head, almost imperceptibly. "That's not fair. To either of us." I took a step closer, my stomach tested with tension, my fingers itching to reach for her but holding back. "It's exactly what I want," I said again, softer this time. My voice was steadier, but my heart wasn't. She put down the rag, folded it, then refolded it. I noticed the slight tremble in her hands, subtle, human. The quietest confession. I can't," she said, voice breaking slightly, like the words themselves were heavy. She looked down at the counter, at the spilled sugar, at the scratches on the wood. Then back at me. If this goes anywhere." Her words trailed off, unfinished. I wanted to finish them for her. Wanted to say I don't care about anything else. I just want this with you. But I didn't. Instead, I shifted closer, but not too close. We stood there, the cafe silent except for the hum of appliances and the faint squeak of the chair someone had left out. She leaned slightly forward, eyes searching mine, unspoken questions in the tilt of her head. I noticed a flicker of jealousy in her glance when the delivery boy dropped off some boxes outside. I imagined her imagining him noticing her, noticing us. My chest tightened. Her fingers brushed the edge of the counter, then mine, almost just a whisper of contact. I didn't pull away. She didn't either. And then she stepped back, exhaling slowly, like she had just released something too heavy to hold. Her eyes were soft but guarded. She started again. But didn't finish. Instead, she tilted her head toward the door, a silent invitation, or maybe a warning. I wanted to ask the question, "Do you want this?" But the words stuck somewhere between my throat and the edge of the counter. And then she smiled faintly, almost painfully, leaving the air between us thick with what might, or might never, happen. The next week, she didn't show up at the cafe. I sat in my usual corner, coffee cooling in the thermos, thumb hovering over my phone like it might magically summon her. Nothing. A barista nodded politely asking if I wanted a refill. I shook my head. I texted her. Nothing. 3 times. Each message drafted and unsent, the words curling into themselves before they could leave my hands. Hey, are you okay? Did I say something wrong? I miss seeing you. No reply. Then, on Thursday, I ran into her outside the grocery store. She was laughing at something as some said over her phone, face lit up in that quiet, careful way I'd been memorizing for weeks. I hesitated, and she didn't notice me at first. Hey, I said, finally, voice uneven. She blinked, recognition flickering, then a small, polite smile. Ah, hey. Her tone was light, distant. Coffee? I asked, almost automatically. She shook her head. Busy. There was a pause, a distance in her posture that hadn't been there before. I wanted to reach out, close the space, say something that mattered, but the words fell apart in my mouth. I noticed the way she shifted her bag from one shoulder to the other, the careful angle of her body. Protective, controlled. And then I remembered something she had said once, almost in passing: divorced, her son, responsibilities. Things I hadn't let settle before because the thought of it scared me. I missed you, I said finally. Too late, too small. Her eyes flicked downward, then away, and I felt the pull of something shifting irreversibly. I know, she said softly, voice flat, not cold but measured, careful. I left after that. Walked back through streets I knew, coffee long gone cold. I imagined her laughing at her phone, the sound not meant for me, and my chest tightened. I didn't feel heartbroken, I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. The next few days I couldn't settle. I passed the cafe at odd times, hoping she might be there. Sometimes she was, sometimes not. Sometimes I caught her across the street, bending over to tie her son's shoes, the sunlight catching strands of hair I knew so well. I wrote messages I never sent: I'm here. I don't care about anything else. Do you want this? And then one evening, I noticed the bench by the park where we'd walked. Empty. She hadn't been there. Not at 4, not at 5, just absent. I sat for a while anyway, thinking maybe she'd appear, maybe she'd sit across from me, smile faintly, and everything would pick up again where we'd left off. But she didn't. And I left too, fingers brushing my phone, thumb hesitating over the screen. The last unsent message waiting. Unsent. Like a door not knocked, like a sentence left incomplete. It was late evening when I found her at the park bench, the one by the pond with the ducks that barely moved now, only ripples reflecting the orange streetlights. I had walked past it 3 times that day thinking maybe she'd appear, maybe she wouldn't. Tonight, she did. She sat curled into her coat, legs drawn up slightly, hands clasped around a coffee cup that had long gone lukewarm. Her eyes lifted when she noticed me, and for a moment, I wondered if she had thought I wouldn't come. Hey, I said, voice low, careful. She nodded. Hey, the silence settled quickly, thick but not uncomfortable. Just real. I leaned against the railing near her, just enough to be close without asking permission. She didn't move away. I shouldn't have. She started, then paused, looking down at her hands. I shouldn't have left things like that. I shook my head slowly. No, I needed you to be honest. I needed to know what you were thinking. My thumb traced the seam of my jacket. Her eyes flicked up, brief, startled, and then softened. I was scared. Of messing up. Of everything. Of you, maybe. I exhaled, slowly. I had imagined her saying this 100 times, but hearing it now was different, lighter, heavier, all at once. I wanted to close the gap, to reach for her, but I didn't. Instead, I just sat, letting the quiet stretch between us. You could leave, I said finally. I won't make you stay. She looked at me then, really looked. Her eyes lingered, weighing, deciding. I could, she whispered. Then she paused. But I don't want to. That small confession made my chest tighten. I wanted to say something big, something that would solve everything, but I realized there wasn't a big solution. Just this, just the quiet honesty between us. I shifted slightly, offering the barest of touches, my fingers brushing hers as we both held our coffee cups. She didn't pull away, she didn't move closer either. The touch was enough, a bridge, a pause, a soft acknowledgement that we had made it here, finally, without disaster, without the world intruding. I didn't think, she said after a beat, voice trailing. I didn't think I could do this. Do what? I asked, careful, hesitant. Sit here. Be me, not worrying. Her shoulders slumped slightly, relief hidden in her posture. I gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. Okay, and she smiled back faintly, a little crooked but real. Enough. That single, quiet acknowledgement carried all the words we hadn't spoken, all the months of pauses, almost, and near misses. We sat like that for a while, sipping coffee, letting the city hum around us. Nothing had changed except for the fact that we had said it. Everything, almost, in the smallest of gestures, in the simplest of agreements. Nothing loud, just enough. Weeks had passed. The cafe smelled of toasted bread and stale sugar, the same corner where I had sat countless mornings, coffee cooling beside my notebook. She arrived at exactly 8:47 a.m., as if the clock itself had trained her. Black coffee, I asked, voice light habitual. She smiled faintly, a tilt of her head that carried months of small confessions and stolen moments. You remembered, she said. I always do, I replied, though my heart still fluttered. We moved through the morning routine as we had before. A quiet rhythm, nothing dramatic. She leaned across the counter to drop a few coins into my hand as payment for pastries, a subtle gesture that had become a small, private language between us. I tucked the coins away, keeping them with the notebook I always brought, a little reminder of her. Later, we walked to the park, the same bench by the pond where ducks floated lazily, reflections shifting with the ripples. She pulled her coat tighter around her, and I handed her a thermos of tea. Our fingers brushed in the transfer, and I didn't pull away. Not this time. We sat in silence, but it wasn't empty. There were smiles at nothing, shared glances, the kind of connection that didn't need words because the pauses themselves said everything. She sipped her tea, and I remembered how months ago she had hesitated over coffee here, how each small choice had mattered more than the grand gestures we hadn't yet dared. A dog barked in the distance, a jogger passed, the wind tugged at her scarf. I noticed all of it. The tiny details I had memorized, not because I was obsessive, but because this quiet life, had become ours. Do you ever think about before? I asked softly, nodding toward the empty stretch of the park where we had stumbled over unsent messages and near confessions. Sometimes, she admitted, eyes lingering on a fallen leaf. But not much. Not enough to matter. I nodded. That was enough. The past had been heavy, but now it felt light. Not perfect, not flawless, but warm, grounded, real. We lingered, thermos between us, her hand brushing mine once more as she adjusted her scarf. It was subtle, unspoken, enough to remind me that we had chosen each other in these small, unremarkable moments, over and over, without fireworks, without declarations. I thought about all the times I had almost left her, or she had pulled away, all the silences that had weighed like walls. And now none of it felt urgent or dangerous anymore. Just this, a shared corner of the world, a bench, black coffee, tea in a thermos, and quiet smiles that said everything we needed. I leaned back, letting the bench creak beneath me. She rested her head lightly against my shoulder, a small, private gesture, and I realized. This was the kind of love that didn't need to shout. It just existed, quietly and fully, because we had earned it. I smiled faintly and she pressed closer. We didn't say anything, we didn't need to, only we would understand.